introductions, but nevertheless, that's my job, and I've been paid to do so. So starting up with Mr. Prasoon Joshi is a national award-winning Indian songwriter, screenwriter, and an advertising copywriter. He's won the Filmfare Award for the Best Lyricist twice consecutively in 2007 and 2008. He's also received a prestigious national award by the President of India in 2007 for Tare Zameen Par and in 2013 for Chittagong. Sir, let me tell you, Tare Zameen Par actually made me cry. So I don't know if I should thank you or I don't know, but thank you very much for that. Next, due to some unfortunate reason, we do not have Mrs. C.S. Lakshmi with us at the moment, but we also have a very, how am I supposed to put into words? You'll get to know that. But we have Urvashi Butalia. She's a feminist writer. Thank you so much for joining us, ma'am. We also have Mr. Mahmood Farooqi, who was educated at the St. Stephen's College in Delhi and at the University of Oxford and Cambridge as a Rhodes Scholar. He's worked as a journalist and has a newspaper column. He's a newspaper columnist. His first book, Besieged, Voices from Delhi, 1857, was widely acclaimed as a breakthrough work of history. Over the last 7 years, he has effected a major revival of the lost art of Urdu storytelling. He was also the co-director and the casting director for the Hindi film Peepli Live. So congratulations and welcome once again. And our moderator, we have Mr. Navtej Sarna. He's the author of the novels The Exile and We Weren't Lovers Like That, as well as the short story collection Winter Evenings. His non-fiction works include the Book of Nanak, Folk Tales of Poland, and the translation of Guru Gobind Singh's Zafarnama. His most recent work is Savage Harvest, a translation of Punjabi partition short stories. He contributes regularly to the Times Literary Supplement, The Hindu, and other journals. So welcome to you too, sir. Thank you very much for joining us. So make sure that you keep the applauses going as we welcome the panel on stage. Thank you so much for joining in today. All right, so thank you, sir, and thank you, ma'am, for giving us your precious time. I hope you're going to have a good time. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy yourself. Thank you.
Hello. Working? Yeah. Good afternoon. Pleasure to be here with this very distinguished panel, and a very easy job for a moderator here because this is the kind of panel which is going to speak for itself. But I think this issue, I'll just start off with a couple of comments. This issue of bilingualism, and in fact multilingualism, is perhaps not unique to India, but India is one of the countries where this is a real subject. In most countries, you don't have that richness of variety of language. There's about 30 years ago, as a young trainee, I was traveling in the back of a military one-ton truck somewhere deep down in Nagaland, and we had lost our way. We came out of the truck, we saw two young Naga boys cooking a pigeon or something on the roadside. And so I started speaking to them, and I was trying to use sign language. I tried Hindi, asked, I have to go, idhar jana hai, kidhar jana hai, ye, wo. I tried everything. For about 15 minutes, we were lost. And one of the boys turns around to me and says, "Do you speak English?" That really brought home to me the kind of country we live in and the issues of language. I think we have the fact that we think in different languages concurrently, dream in one language, write in another language, we all know. But here we have panelists, writers, creative people who have actually worked in both languages. So I'm going to start off, Prasoon, may we request you to tell us something about your journey your bilingual journey between Hindi and English, whether it's the film world or the ad world.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, first of all, thank you for introducing me. And I started, of course, I'm born in Uttarakhand, and a small hill town, and the languages I interacted with in the beginning were Hindi, Urdu, and the local Kumaoni language, the Pahari language. And later on, when I moved to Delhi and Bombay, and I learned and sort of course you learn English as a subject, but that's not what language is for me. Language is something which you have soaked into. I somehow, this bilingual it confuses me, because I don't think you can think in one language and then write in another language. It's actually, for me, thought and the expression is one unitary moment. I don't think you can separate the thought and the language. The language, I don't think you first think and you sort of, now I would choose the language I want to express it in, and I don't think, I at least don't write like that. It comes as one process is one, and then when you see it, you probably sometimes are yourself surprised with the thought which was hidden in the language, so I think for me, I've never been able to make a conscious choice of the language I am choosing to write in, especially when I'm writing poetry. I never have been able to, and it's very important, because, language and culture are not to, that's the reason it's important. Sometimes people say that, thought can be saved, but I think if the language dies, with it, the culture also dies. A word is the capsule of culture. A word is not alone. When a word dies, it dies with the culture. It takes the culture with it. So it's very important to understand that. At least for me, I know a lot of people who write in many other languages. But I have studied and tried to see that they have also traveled. They culturally traveled. It's not that they have just picked up the language and they started practicing that language. They've culturally traveled into the world of that language, and that is the reason they express themselves in that language. For me, that has been the journey till now.
Thank you, Prasoon. And I'm going to plunge this straight across to Mahmood on the point that Prasoon left off, that the death of a language and the death of a culture go together. Because you, for now, I think, best part of a decade, have been involved in resurrecting the old Urdu storytelling art of Dastan Goi, because it had died. I read this lovely little snippet on one of the articles on Dastan Goi that there was one of the best exponents of Dastan Goi was reduced to selling pan. So could you tell us something about what it is, firstly for the audience, how it was lost, and how is it coming back?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll just actually start with, I totally and completely agree with Prasoon here, because the loss of a word, even a single word, is not just the loss of the word, because words are worldviews in a sense, They have a worldview. Each word has a kind of a sensibility and a worldview behind it. You can have, 5 different words for courtesy. What you get in a word called shishtachar and what you get in a word called tehzeeb are different things, are different shades of an emotion. And each word that we come up with, we are coming up with a worldview in a sense, And also the fact that, thoughts obviously occur in words, Thoughts are not outside words. There may be some inchoate form going on in your brain, but if it is a thought, it has to have a word, otherwise it is not a thought. Dastan Goi is an art of Urdu storytelling, which was very popular at one time, and then it sort of died out when the last practitioner, as you're saying, Mir Bakar Ali, passed away in 1928. I grew up in a household reading Urdu. I was taught Urdu by my father, because when I was growing up in Gorakhpur, Urdu is no longer taught in schools there. It used to be taught many years ago. My mother and my father taught me Urdu. And I grew up reading Urdu and reading Urdu literature, but I had no idea about anything called Dastan Goi or Dastans, what it is and what the form was, until I stumbled upon, until my uncle, who's a great scholar of Urdu, drew my attention to it. And I read his book. Through that, I realized, that there was an oral tradition of telling stories, which was when put to print, ran into 46 volumes. 46,000 pages of this saga called The Adventures of Amir Hamza was recited orally in places in Lucknow, Delhi, Rampur, and then was put to print and ran into that kind of a length. That is probably the most massive and the most mammoth kind of storytelling that we have in this country and perhaps in the world. And I had no clue about it. And most Urdu walas didn't have any clue about it. Most people in the performing arts had no clue about that. So it has been a journey to try and put that back on the stage, put it on the map. And obviously we face a particular problem when we perform in Lucknow, even today now, when you perform in places like Lucknow or Delhi, which were hearts of Urdu culture. There's very few people there who understand the Urdu that we are reciting in. Because the density of Urdu, while Urdu continues to remain very popular and prestigious, the density has reduced, has been diluted over the last 50, 60 years. So a lot of people don't understand what we are performing. We have to compensate by our gestures, by our actions, by our facial expressions. But there is a barrier.
So you are actually taking a language and playing it out to people who don't know that language. How difficult is that?
Well, it is difficult. I mean, you are doing, because we are performing strange. The stories themselves are strange. The form is strange. The language is strange. So there's a kind of a compounding of strangeness, which I think what happens, at least in North India, is that a lot of people may not understand Urdu, but they have a great ear for Urdu because thanks to Hindi cinema, they have heard a lot of Urdu, which is they have heard words, they have understood, they have echoes. And in North India, in Delhi at least, a lot of people have memories of their grandfathers. A lot of people who came from Punjab, their language was Urdu, who came and settled in Delhi. So there is a memory of this, and this memory was wonderfully evoked for me, how deep down it penetrates, because when you read that lovely story, Mare Gaye Gulfam, on which Tisri Qasam was made, Renu talks about this village in Bihar, but this village in Bihar, this rustic villager has an ear for Urdu poetry, and that remains with us, I think.
Yeah. Before I come back to, of course, the film scene, which I will come back to, Prasoon, I like to bring in Urvashi here. Urvashi, you've spent so many years nurturing Zuban, your publishing house, and a lot of the stuff that comes out must be coming from different languages. Have you seen it as a kind of a mission to save the loss of language? Is it helping? Tell us something about it.
Yeah, first, thanks, Navtej. I want to tell all of you that I'm not C.S. Lakshmi, but I would actually quite like to be, because I really admire her as a writer. And I'm sure the Bombay audience knows Ambai well, the pseudonym under which she writes the most wonderful stories in Tamil. And one of my reasons for so admiring and so envying C.S. Lakshmi, aka Ambai, is because she is totally bilingual, because she can actually think, write in Tamil and in English, something that I'm not. I desire to be. I mean, I read in Hindi, I read in Punjabi or Gurmukhi, but I don't write in those languages. I write in English. In the publishing house that I work in, which is called Zuban, we focus quite a lot on translations from Indian languages into English. But not only that, also the other way. Because to me, this is one way of replicating the daily negotiations that take place in India between people who have different languages and who manage to cross those boundaries every day at every step, just as that example of the Naga boys demonstrated, and just as all of us visiting another part of India might be doing. But it's also a way of giving respect to the literatures that exist in the languages, which often get pushed down because English has such a sort of place in our society. But I want to talk about two other things to do with language, which is not what you asked me, but it relates to what both Mahmood and Prasoon have said, which is, I mean, in some ways, language is, I mean, it's very, very important, but very often, it fails you in describing experiences for which there are no adequate words. I'm thinking back, for example, to partition and to my own work on partition when I was interviewing people who had lived through that time, and how to find the language to describe both the depth and the cruelty and the weight of that experience and the burden of living with it. Just the literalness of language, the word vibhajan or the word division or the word partition or the word batwara do not in any way adequately touch that experience. So in some ways, I think thinking about language, if I was to look at my own work, I'm forced to think of that. In the same way, while what both of you are saying, that losing a word means losing a whole culture, losing a whole language, all of that is true. But I think also, some ways we need to critically examine languages for the absences that they have. And most languages, much though one loves the language you grow up in, are absent the presence of women. Because I suppose language itself is a patriarchal construction. I know I sound like a stuck record. I always, घुमा फिरा के औरतों के बारे में बात आ जाती है. But there is a way in which that absence is very, very significant. And to re-enter languages, there is a battle that women have to wage against the naturalization of patriarchy inside languages.
Can I take that cue, Prasoon, talking of women's issues, and I'll leave it to you to think in whichever language you want and express in whichever language you want. I understood you wrote something on after the Nirbhaya incident or tragedy. Would you like